So hope you all had a good first half. Some great conversation. I feel like AI is in the air everywhere, and everybody's just talking about AI, whether it's from a perspective of customer experience, regulations. I honestly think of AI as like running water. It has become like a utility now. AI is more real than the last 10, 15, 20 years, or any decade it has been in. So the applications are more real. People understand it a lot better. I feel we are still scratching the surface on it, of course, but the understanding that this technology is here to stay and how do we actually mobilize it, channelize it is at the core of it. There's a lot of content being created using generative AI part of the world. There's a lot of traditional machine learning models being used in different areas of credit, fraud, compliance. So today we have an amazing panel to really kind of dive into some of the leading trends of how AI is shaping fintech and banks. So with that, I'm just going to introduce myself first, and then we'll have all the panelists introduce themselves. Three things: name, where do you work, and a fun fact in less than 3 words. How about that? Okay. All right. I'm Saurabh. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Oscillor. Oscillor is an AI risk decisioning platform for credit risk, fraud risk, compliance risk. We use AI and generative AI for solving all the challenges of how do you ingest data easily, create strategies and logic to be able to monitor all sorts of risks across the bank and fintech, and then automate all the review, regulations, reporting, analytics out of it. Fun fact about me, I can eat 6,000 calories and not gain weight. That was less than 3 words, but more than 3 words. Yeah. All right, Emily.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
I was going to say that seems like a superpower, not a fun fact. I'm Emily Reisig. I work at Emprise Bank. I manage strategic relationships in Emprise Embedded, which is our sponsor bank business. Today, I'll largely be talking about what we're doing with ML and AI in our core bank, serving our community bank, as we build and expand that with our fintech partnerships. Emprise Bank is headquartered in Wichita, Kansas. We're a community bank, about $2.5 billion in assets. My fun fact is that I actually started at the bank as a teller.
Oh, fantastic. Carson.
Hi, everybody. My name's Carson Lapatito. I'm the president of SunWest Bank, which is just headquartered about 20 minutes down the road from here. And I'm also one of the founding general partners of BankTech Ventures that invests in technology for banks. And the fun fact about me is with all this technology, I love to read actual books.
Michael.
Yeah, hi, everybody.
It is out of battery.
We'll trade off. Okay, how's that? Yeah. Pleasure to be here, everybody. Mike Umlauf. I lead the credit data science and analytics function at TransUnion, the credit bureau. And that entails managing a global team of data scientists who provide analytic services to financial services customers, insurance, things like that, primarily. And then AI is sort of a necessary ingredient. Fun fact about me, I used to work for FedEx and somehow found my way into this industry. So pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Fantastic. Great panel. As you can see, all operators, builders, innovators, leading great banks, great functions. I was at the room next door. There was these amazing startups pitching their ideas about applications of AI and how they're either thinking of disrupting point solutions or ways of working in a bank, whether it's on the onboarding side with people using voice to streamline form filling, or whether it was uploading your documents, Excel sheets and PDFs, and converting that into analytical tables so that you can just ask and do some analytical queries on it, or be able to just ask questions on it. And then also, how do you kind of automate a lot of the processes around verification, validation? Emily was telling me how today people just drive down to a Bank of America location to do validation of whether the check is real or not. So definitely a lot of applications being thought of. So with that question, let's talk a bit about the AI innovation in product development. And maybe it'll be good to hear from all of you on how your institutions are really bringing in real AI
to the use cases that are making the most difference to your customers. So maybe Emily, let's start with you.
Yeah, I can kick off with a small business underwriting tool that our team has built. So they saw a team with, they saw a problem with that team where they were analyzing over 40 components and attributes to do their underwriting. And they had automation in place, but for certain more complex deals, they wanted to speed that up even faster. And so they worked with our internal team. For Emprise Bank, we actually have a team of data scientists that have built predictive models over the last 4 years. We've been building that infrastructure and that talent to service and build in-house. And through that course of that effort, they actually ran it side by side for a period of time and were able to validate with a spectrum of the likelihood of a yes/no approval. So not a simple black and white, but really demonstrating to the underwriter how close is this to your ideal expectations for when you would likely say yes. It's been powerful to that team, not only for speed, but also for consistency. As you can imagine, there's subjectivity involved. It's hard to pull that out. By pulling in all these 40 data attributes and wrapping it up into this tool, it's significantly enhanced that muscle for our bank.
Could you talk a bit about like the performance outcome of those things?
Yeah, they did a look back. I think this is an important piece that I heard someone else talk about earlier today is having access to your data and understanding and the history of your data, retaining it long enough to build and test some of these models and these tools. And so they actually use the information or use the tool to do a look back to see if we did this previously, would it match the outcome of the approval that we have already made? So they did a number of tests in that way to build confidence, and it has sped up the time and also made the underwriters' lives better, right? So they don't want to be tracking down those 40 attributes either as they look over each deal. They want to look at more complex opportunities and spend their time that way.
Awesome. Carson, maybe let's move to you. I was just thinking from a community banking perspective, I know you wear two hats. Maybe let's first understand a bit from a community banking perspective. How do you think AI is shaping? What are the conversations going on? Where do you see like the most bang for the buck in terms of the product offerings that your team is offering?
Well, I'll start with one example. We've started putting a company called Cognize in place, and it solves one component of our underwriting process. And so we compartmentalize the solving problems at SunWest. You can't go and call Fiserv and say, hey, I want an AI solution to streamline workflow. That's like saying, I want to take a dog for a walk. And so what we found, though, is that our problem in spreading is spreading audited financial statements. It's the only thing that is not consistent in the underwriting process. Cognize has an AI-based gridding solution where it looks through however many documents you want to give it, and it finds all the grids in them. And then it finds the grids with the numbers, and then it segments the grids with the numbers into a database. And now all of a sudden you have compartmentalized spread financials out of an audited financial statement. You can do that with a 10Q. You can do it with a variety of things. But that was one use case where it's just an incredibly creative tool of using machine learning to run across lots of documents and solve a task that a human has to do. Now all the human has to do is look at the document in front of them. They don't have to page through 32 pages. And if they have a question about something, they can just go to the note and check it out. So that was one dynamic. But I think more fundamentally, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, it's data. At the end of the day, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I'm teaching her how to read right now. And I'm teaching her the alphabet first. I don't give her a whole sentence and tell her to read it. And AI is the same way, right? In banking, every banker in this room has a data problem. Is there anybody in this room that doesn't have a data problem? Okay, you can't do AI until you have somewhat structured or normalized data. So the first step in the process is build the alphabet, which is get your data clean in one system or in a few systems that know how to interact with each other. And that, if there's one takeaway of this day here, I would say go home and make sure your data is clean and you have a data strategy and people that focus on it every day.
That's super valid. Garbage in, garbage out, the classic cliche, but it always holds true whether it's teaching the Gen AI or the traditional AI. Garbage in is always garbage out. Michael, let's talk a bit about TransUnion. How are you kind of looking at data? How are you looking at AI applications of products? Where does the next 5 years lie for you?
Sure. So warms my heart to hear that data is at the center of the business, certainly the center of our business. So I think the past dozen years or so, we've been doing what many of us have been doing, just sort of building out the alphabet soup of algorithms and trying to come up with the best performing models. over that managed data asset. And what we've seen in that time, as the industry has seen, the alternative data options have grown. And so, what we used to consider core is being supplemented with all kinds of alternative data. And then also the demands on the teams have grown as well. So we're not just solving models, trying to come up with the best models. We're getting a lot more inquiry around explainability and around fairness testing and disparate impact testing and all the things needed to support that. And that's, by the way, on a global backdrop. So we have the EU version of that playing against the India version and the Brazil version, the US. So what we've really been doing is trying to build that toolkit that supports the whole breadth of needs. And for my team, that generally means I'm not going to come up with the one solution. I have to come up with the 5 or 6 that are necessary to cover that whole spectrum, and make a kind of like a portfolio play on what are the right things to build. And so as we moved into this fairness space where there's a lot more demand for that kind of thing, that's really where a lot of our R&D has gone. So we've been, from a credit perspective, we're not looking at as many of the new alphabet soup algorithms. It's much more about the dozen ways that you can do fairness testing, the different ways to develop a race proxy, all the things that we're being guided to by our customers and the regulators we're interacting with. And so we've gone through a process of kind of shifting our focus into that area, expanding the toolkit to cover those needs in the same way, really just building a menu of options. And then, working very closely with all the industry stakeholders we interact with to solve problems that way. So that's really been, I'm speaking to the credit side of our business, but that's really been our focus.
Makes sense. At Oscilla as well, we work with many fintechs and banks, and we hear many things repeat and repeat. And one of the key things that we always hear about is how do you really think of the value adds and then break it down to use cases. And the value adds are always, how do you improve your acceptance rate, people onboarding? What can I do? What role does AI play, either in a customer experience perspective or a detection perspective? How do you reduce friction? Because people have onboarded already, and you want to kind of really think of what are things that are getting in their day-to-day jobs of getting stuff done, and what does it mean to actually improve that experience. The third part is there's a lot of investments from a banking perspective on the operation side where people are reviewing alerts or data or need to be able to make decisions on things that would take them sifting through documents, as you mentioned, Carson, being able to put that data somewhere, not read 30 pages, or be able to kind of look at alerts and open 7 different screens and figure out why this alert got generated, who this person is, and then be able to kind of do reporting analytics on top of that. And all of these are use cases which kind of really look at the banking experience, both as an external customer or someone working at the bank kind of really sees a lot of value add. So with that, let's maybe talk a bit more of the depth. We've heard a lot about generative AI in the last 3-4 years. Of course, OpenAI is at the helm of creating new technologies with ChatGPTs. There's a lot of advancements of what generative AI has done for creative workers. Maybe let's talk about generative AI and its applications as you guys see it for the banking and fintech space. So maybe let's talk about certain use cases of where generative AI does well. How does that compare to more of the so-called traditional AI, machine learning? Maybe shed some light on that.
Sure, I can kick us off. So at Enterprise, we're building a generative lab for our employees to use for a number of use cases. I think the important thing with generative AI is to remember the subjectivity involved and that you pair it with the right use case and the problem that you're solving. I also think about how do we get our employees through that adoption curve of this technology and using it, and launching this generative lab is a method for us to do that, to meet a variety of stakeholders where they're at, and so they can get comfortable and understand what this tool means. I was listening to a podcast as I flew out here yesterday, and I think it was Sam Altman that maybe said this quote, so don't get me, if I'm incorrect, I apologize. But he was riffing off of Steve Jobs' comment around the computers are like a bike for the mind. And then he said, okay, generative AI is electric biking for the mind. So as we think about use cases, it's how can we get our employees and our customers, but for us today, it's starting with employees, to have a more expansive view of the data and the material that they're working through so they can move faster.
Michael, would love to hear how TransUnion is thinking about generative AI.
Sure. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, again, generative AI, and if you saw payments talk earlier, Gen AI is this box within machine learning. We kind of think of it as a similar extension of existing capabilities, obviously in a different direction. But I'm not going to talk about the sort of normal productivity use cases that I think everybody understands. There's a lot of value there. If coming at it from the perspective of my team, who's building models and trying to enhance our products, I tend to think of this, and we've gone through a similar journey with other technologies, but there's kind of like a progression. The first level is data scientists. They're keen to try these things anyway. So, to your point, setting up a lab, providing that safe space to experiment is sort of absolutely table stakes. Once they get there, first layer is them figuring out ways to do their work more efficiently. And they tend to do that, at least our team tends to do that kind of self-activating. They just do it themselves. They figure it out. The challenge there is just making sure that they share back when they find something really good. Here's something that really improved our process. Let's figure out a way to operationalize that and make it bigger. So that's kind of the first layer. And I think when we talk about this in financial services, we tend to sort of pivot to the final model as the end product, and we think kind of in terms of, can I use Gen AI for that or not? We don't really go all the way there. We say, all right, is there a step in the modeling process that can be improved by this technology? And so, we've known from bits and pieces of this technology, like deep learning in the past, there are ways to apply these models to maybe data sets that aren't as familiar to try to extract signals that you didn't have before. That could be like an insight cycle that the analyst uses to figure out a way to do something. They may not implement it that way. Might implement it more traditionally as even just a basic static rule or something like that. But the Gen AI tool really is a companion that can create insights that can improve models. And so, I think feature extraction is one. We may get to the point where we're using it to actually build full-scale models. We're not there, and we would go through a very methodical process of making sure it's a way to improve the models. But we're definitely not there at this point. But I think that's potentially a next level once the other levels are proven out.
So generative AI is definitely democratizing the access to skills and access to the data so that people of different levels of skill set can do things which others were basically doing using complex technologies, right? Carson, maybe talk a bit about how smaller institutions, what's the impact for them? What are the biggest hurdles that you see in adopting generative AI, and how is it level playing the field for the smaller institutions? And
So the biggest issue is what I started with earlier, data. You can't do generative AI if you don't have a data set. And everybody likes to talk about, model bias and sample bias. Well, if the data's not right, you're just innately biased from the beginning, right? And I'll use a perfect example. If you don't have a cohesive householding platform at your bank where you are consistently across divisions bucketing what customers are related to what customers are under what household and business, it's more material than in consumer, then you cannot create a Gen AI model that spits back balances, historical transactions, because you're going to have to run that by account number or loan number, and you won't have the whole comprehensive relationship. So all this technology is amazing, but if you have a Ferrari but you don't know how to drive, it's a problem. And so, I think that you really need to get to that core fundamental perspective, like, how do I clean my data up and what AI tool am I going to use, and then clean up the data that relates to that instead of trying to clean it all up at once, because if you clean it all up at once, you'll never finish it. But I think that the most approachable Gen AI tool is just internal, changing the internal UI of your bank. So we're a Fiserv shop. If you log into Fiserv Director, it feels like you're on like a 1988 mainframe computer. But there's no point in upgrading it, because that'd be like buying a DVD.
yeah,
Because at some point, like, you're going to wake up and you're going to just put in, when was the last time this customer did a transaction with FedEx? It's going to come back with every single transaction that unfolded. So that's the use case. It makes it really approachable, because if you think about retraining your 30-year-old or 20-year-old workforce, right? Because those are your up and coming folks into the business, how to use this antiquated platform. Click through there. This is how you look at a loan. This is how you look at the payment history. as opposed to using what they're used to, which is when was the last time this person went 30 days delinquent on their loan? Put that in, it comes back. And so, I think it levels the playing field in the sense of you're going to be able to innovate more effectively. But if you don't innovate, the playing field is becoming two chasms. And I think that's what I see. So wearing my Bank Tech Ventures hat, I talk all over the place. I talk to banks on a regular basis. And there are two camps. Those are the ones that have, I should say there's three camps. There's the ones that have dove in headlong and they're approaching it. There's the others that have recognized they have a problem and they need to do something about it. And then there's the third camp, which is the highest in count, which don't know they have a problem. And I think that's really the dynamic facing the community bank and regional banking industry right now.
I wanted to tag on some of the approaches that community banks can have to step into this space. So I think about what we've done at Emprise. We have data governance committee that is defining data, but data owners that can help make those definitions, because your data team can't do that without business context. So you need to involve the rest of the stakeholders into the conversation. Launching an AI policy. You may not know where you will go with AI, but at least starting with a foundation and a ground floor of how you'll approach it and how you'll use it, and starting to put that out into policy and words. We also have an AI task force. That's where the small business underwriting idea came from. Again, engaging these business owners in the company and in the bank that can lean into those that understand what's possible, and having them find each other and partner together to go solve these problems.
Yeah, I think the adoption of generative AI forces everyone to latch on to up-leveling their knowledge, their skill set to what it actually means to be successful. Carson, to your point, you just can't bring data in and hope it would work. And you would see big tech companies investing a lot in data platforms and feature stores and really knowing what it means to call data understanding or data normalization or data correctness or data missingness kind of things. And those were kind of the norms. And that I would say a lot of big tech companies understand. But as you kind of bring a lot of this generative AI to the common use cases, it's not that those problems go away and those problems need to be solved. So definitely there's a lot more scope of investments and startups coming in this area to solve for that as well. Let's pivot to the next question. Talk a bit more about just the customer life cycle, right? And kind of break down that customer life cycle into 3 or 4 core parts and how you see some of the applications of deeper AI in those areas. So let's start with customer experience management. Customer experience is all about how you attract more customers, how do you retain them, what does building loyalty means, because now everyone has a business online. So it's not as amazing just to have yet another form or a login or an app. So maybe if each of you can shed some light on what are some of the unique ways that your banks or your portfolio companies have been thinking about like customer experience management using AI, maybe talk a bit more about the depth of those use cases.
Yeah, I can kick us off. Maybe closer to more traditional machine learning. We've done customer segmentation. So this is helping us understand how to market and who to market to. We've tied that into automated marketing campaigns, right? So it's learning who's clicking and who's opening, who's applying for that product that we marketed, and getting smarter through that effort. It also helps us validate our assumptions about our customers, right? So we go into it believing one thing and helping us have a affirmation or not about those beliefs before we go launch a new campaign or build a new product. Another example for us in the customer space would be next product recommendation, helping, again, tying to automated processes, but also putting it into systems that our branch staff can use, our digital staff can use, and the more automated marketing tools can use. As someone that works with fintech partners to support them as a sponsor bank, what's next for us is then thinking about how do we support them in their efforts? How do I make it easier to work with Emprise Bank to follow our rules and expectations? How do we make it easy to oversee their program by using some of these fundamentals? That's still aspirational, to be honest, at this point, but we're hoping to leverage some of these examples and these learnings that we've had in our core bank to bring into our embedded banking business as well.
Got it. Carson.
So we at Bank Tech invested in a company called Revio, which SunWest uses as well, and it's basically a tool that mines transaction and customer data and finds out all of the services that a customer uses with another bank, but the conduit for all those payments or transactions or settlement are SunWest or the other bank. And so through the first party data what services they're already using. You don't need to figure out next best product with like the vision. You just know they already have this product. You know who it's with, and you know how to position it against it. So we've used that data analytics tool to basically deepen the relationship, because most banks only have one or two products with the customer. And your cross-sell strategy is, we're going to cross-sell card this month because that's what the manager wants us to do. So then everybody calls whoever they feel most comfortable calling, and they try to sell them card. Well, our program is we deliver the highest profitability card customers to our salespeople on a short list with a script, and then they go and execute on that. Those scripts are AI generated based upon the product, the amount of spend, and the bank at which you're the card provider you're targeting. And we have some sample lists that are generated by it. So that's an example of how we use it.
So laser focused targeting.
Yeah, the way I call it is accountability. So with data, you can deliver accountability as opposed to just activity, and accountability is what drives change.
Absolutely. I think as we think of onboarding, customer friction as the key use cases to retaining a customer, I think self-serviceability of how customers can do a lot more without engaging with the normal channels. I'm not sure about many of you here, but we get a lot of robocalls, we get a lot of emails, we get a lot of notifications from different apps. It's like overwhelming. And so if I need information, I should be able to just go in and like find that information in the most simplest ways regarding, other than like going through like 10 different screens and figuring out where that data is hidden. I think there's a lot to be thought about what self-service actually means in the new world, rather than no code or UI experiences. What is self-service? So with that, maybe let's pivot to the opposite side of the coin. As you always think of onboarding new customers and reducing friction, there is the counterbalance of fraud, right? We all know fraud is not like the fraud in any other era. Fraud is a lot more organized. We saw that through the unemployment insurance fraud that happened post-COVID, with hundreds of billions of dollars lost in unemployment insurance fraud. There's, of course, people who are manually doing it, but there's a lot of like bots. There's a lot of automation. Generative AI has created the perfect SMS. No more spelling errors now. Deep fakes are real. We've seen all those, whether it's Elon Musk or whoever. Those Zoom attacks, $25 million, where someone convinced a CEO. So there's always these challenges around fraud that have been arising as well. Like, so how are your teams or how are your portfolio companies thinking of fighting fraud with Gen AI or with AI? Like, maybe just talk through some of these examples of where you feel there's a lot more opportunity that has not been yet kind of looked at. So Michael, maybe let's start with you from a TransUnion perspective.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we've had a couple of things going on in recent years. Number one, a major upgrade of our entire fraud suite. So there's a lot of activity going on there, and a tech transformation initiative that's even broader, which is the underpinning of all of our services at this point. So everything from analytics to product delivery to, very importantly, the data management layer. So, basing our management of all of our data assets in a modern foundation that provides all the governance and controls. As that's a backdrop. So a couple of things worth mentioning from a fraud perspective. So TransUnion's, a large part of the fraud problem is an identity problem. Obviously, the very first step is you have to use the data assets available to try to verify that whatever information you're being presented in a transaction is real. Is this really a person I'm dealing with? Is it the right person? And so one of the core assets that we've been developing and enhancing is a very kind of machine learning first approach to integrating all of these data assets and trying to develop very robust identity graphs that have models that determine the appropriate linkage strength between all the different elements. So this could be a combination of location fields, person fields, email, telephone, all the various things that we can collect through the ecosystem. So we do have identity graphs that drive our fraud solutions that are based on machine learning models fundamentally. And so that graph then can be clustered or constructed for different use cases. So for a fraud use case, you might want to have a certain level of specificity, and you can make it work for you for that way. So that's a foundational element. Not Gen AI, more traditional AI, but I think that's kind of like a key construct we use. A little more kind of in the R&D mode, the fraud team has been, I'll call it, inspired by some of the work that's been going on in the Gen AI space. If you look at a large language model, it's really the simplest form of it is sort of a sentence constructor, right? So you have a bunch of words, and then the model kind of helps you figure out what's the next word. And in a fraud context, the team has started to take all the different signals that come in through the ecosystem and construct sentences out of those. So instead of words, you're talking about events. And a sequence of events can be laid out on a timeline. And if the models are based on their own history, say, this is what I would expect to happen next, and something else happens, you have an anomaly. An anomaly could be a fraud, and that kind of leads us down a different path. So there's an entire kind of development path going on around that construct, which, I wouldn't call it Gen AI per se, but it's certainly inspired by the underlying techniques. So that's something that the team is pretty optimistic that they're going to be able to develop products around.
Emily.
Yeah, sure. With us having an in-house capability in this space, we often have to think about build versus buy partner. For us, we have similar in an R&D space. We have a use case that we're setting up a proof of concept with at the moment around debit card fraud. So we have strong partners that obviously service this space for us and have deep learnings themselves from all the other banks that they service. The way we're approaching it is, what data do we have within our walls at Emprise that we know uniquely about our customers? So we think about what is our domain of expertise and how can we add that on top of an existing partnership, an existing vendor, to further enhance it for our own customer base.
Cliche. Fraud is a cat and mouse game. The mouse will always be ahead, knows the traps, right, Carrie? And while the mouse doesn't have to build presentations and QBRs to convince their management of what's been happening, the cat definitely has to build all these presentations. So definitely, I feel there's a lot of opportunity for the banks on how to be more effective at detecting fraud. At Oscillar, we have seen one of the core things that generative AI has brought in is creating synthetic data. So the problems around AML has been there's not a lot of label data, right? You have SARS, they go into a sinkhole as a suspicious activity report. There's no feedback whether there's something was truly a suspicious activity, truly money laundering. There's account takeover fraud, that has very few labels. It's not like your chargebacks or disputes where you have someone basically saying this is not my transaction. Or in the case of first-party fraud, what is intent? Intent is a hard science problem, right? It's not as simple as the attacker going and claiming someone's account and doing something. And so in that case, creating synthetic data to create scenarios and testing your models against those unknown scenarios has been a very powerful tool that we have seen, at least. Of course, all the other things around using deep learning and traditional models have been useful, but I feel the power to generate scenarios at scale, that's kind of the iteration you need from a cat and mouse game, right? So let's talk a bit about 5 minutes. Let's talk a bit more about the context of AI from a BAS oversight and monitoring. There's a lot of fintechs doing disruptive, innovative products, onboarding customers, sometimes that don't require an SSM, but also having very complex products, serving the underbanked, where they're taking in a lot more risk. And on the other side, you have the BAS sponsorship banks who are basically dealing with how do I deal with monitoring these fintechs, and how, in the wake of all the consent orders that have been coming in, how do I tell the regulators that I'm doing my job in being able to keep the programs compliant? What do you see as some of the challenges? Maybe, Emily, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll double down on Carson's point about data, as if we haven't already enough. So as we've stepped into embedded banking at Emprise, it has been all about how do we ensure that we have access to the data of our partners, our fintech partners, in our walls. And how do we define it? How do we normalize it? Many sponsor banks like Emprise have multiple partners, right? So different processors, different ledgers. That means different data definitions. They are not always equal because they look similar. So you have to also think about normalizing that data. So I think about strong oversight. It's being able to understand what's happening broadly in your fintech partners' spaces and bringing that to the teams that support it every day. That's a key foundation to our strategy as we've built our business. So we can leverage things like AI and machine learning. So we can build strong oversight. So we can find anomalies. We don't want to add people to a scale problem. We want to be able to step in with that growth in the right way with the right approach, but also keep it safe and sound. So I do have the benefit of having the community bank that has deployed some of these use cases and been through exams and brought our regulators along with what we're building that I believe has strengthened and will strengthen the same use cases as we folded into our embedded banking business.
Carson, you must be in the thick of these things.
Well, I don't know if I'm in the thick of these things because we're not a sponsor bank. We sat on the sidelines because I didn't trust the data that was coming out of the general fintech world to operate at scale and the regulatory framework was very undefined. And so we could have flipped it on. We have amazing technology, but I just couldn't get my arms around the framework. With that said, I think the expectations are now becoming clear. The rules of the road exist. So now you can actually execute on a strategy because you know where you're going. However, one of the things that regulation is typically behind the curve of where the markets are moving. And I'll use KYC for a perfect example because we were just talking about fraud. KYC, know your customer, right? If you know your customer, you know what fraud to detect. It's when you don't truly know your customer that you don't have the algorithms that will understand your customer's behavior that fraud occurs. And so we have turned, as an industry, we've turned KYC into checkbox.
Yeah.
Into a regulatory checkbox, not into the philosophy of how know your customer was created. And so I think that as an industry, whether it's BaaS or as traditional banking, and by the way, BaaS is just I do correspondent banking. BaaS is just correspondent banking, right, for fintechs. You need to have the data and you need to understand what your customer is going to do and you need to monitor it and you need to do it proactively. And I think that's the challenge we need to take away as an industry is how do we go and tackle this before the regulators tell us how to do it? Because ultimately, you are going to know your customer as the institution. If you don't, your customer probably shouldn't be comfortable banking them.
And it's true that KYC is a checkbox now, name, address, phone number, email. If you think it's not compromised, it's already compromised. It's all there. So if you're just checking name, address, phone number, email, you're just paying $1 or something to check the checkbox. So what does CIP monitoring actually mean? What does CIP effectiveness actually mean? Has to be redefined. I think the biggest challenge there for the sponsor bank is on the community bank, you're monitoring your customers. You know their customers, right? Even if the name, address, phone number, email might be compromised, but you know your customers. With fintechs, it's almost like you're monitoring 50 other banks who have complex products and complex customers and innovation, and it becomes an even more interesting challenge. So data, techniques from algorithms, and how do you reduce the investigation or the time spent on manual tasks, I think becomes a key in what role Gen AI or AI plays in that. So with that, I think we're up for time. But I hope you all had some interesting insights and peeks into the real applications of AI at banks and fintechs and what are some of the challenges and how AI is here to stay, like running water.